but I'd like first to introduce myself. My name is Delphine Clavrel. I'm a policy analyst here at the OECD working on regional development policy, and it's my pleasure to welcome all of you to this webinar on making the most of place-based industrial policy, which is jointly hosted by the OECD Center for Entrepreneurship, SMEs, Region and Cities, and the United States Mission to the OECD. This is the most recent webinar in a series we've conducted together this past year on global inspirations, local innovations, which aims to spotlight international best practices on topical issues and to connect with some national leaders, especially in the United States. We have assembled a group of esteemed speakers and a great moderator for today's discussion. Before I turn to them, I'd like to remind everyone of just a few housekeeping points. So first, please note that our webinar today will be entirely in English. The discussion is live streamed on our YouTube channel and the recording will be made available afterward. And finally, for all our participants, you have the possibility to engage with our panelists via the Zoom Q&A function. So please do not hesitate to write down your questions, and time permitting, our moderator will raise some of them during our Q&A session toward the end of the webinar, but we'll also encourage the speakers to respond to the others in writing. So now, without further ado, I'm delighted to give the floor to the United States Ambassador to the OECD, Sean Patrick Maloney, for some opening remarks. Ambassador, the floor is yours.
Well, thank you so much, Delphine. Thank you to all of you for joining us. Special thank you to our panelists who I know are joining us from Canada, Germany, the United States, and you're going to be hearing from Nadim Ahmad right after me. So thank you to all involved. Look, I don't want to take up a lot of your time. I know you have a lot to get to. I'm Sean Patrick Maloney. I'm the U.S. Ambassador to the OECD. And I think you all know the OECD is one of the world's premier policy formation organizations. We're 38 nations strong, and our mission is to develop better policies for better lives of the people in the countries that we represent. And that work really does happen here, and on a great number of topics. And this sub-national effort, I think, is one of the best things we do to bring that policy analysis, that research, those best practices, those insights to all of you who are on the front lines doing this policy. And today's subject is a great example of that, focusing on place-based industrial policy. You know, before becoming the U.S. Ambassador to the OECD, I was a member of the United States House of Representatives. And in my 10 years in Congress, there was nothing we did that was more impactful probably than the Inflation Reduction Act and the CHIPS and Science Act. And those are real examples of trying to use policy to develop better economic progress for the people we represented. You know, these two bills were created with the aim of revitalizing the American manufacturing sector, nothing less than that, and boosting competitiveness in certain strategic industries. Semiconductors in particular. I mean, the CHIPS Act invests in domestic high-tech research and has been instrumental in equipping the American workforce with the skills and resources necessary to thrive in global markets. And as an example, the Commerce Department's CHIPS Women in Construction framework is a great example of how the CHIPS Act has been used to support entrepreneurs. You know, and business owners in advanced manufacturing and construction sectors throughout the United States. So part of the reason why we're doing these subnational webinars is because of the value we all derive in hearing from how our peers in other countries are innovating to address common problems. That's really what the OECD does best. And we're 6 decades in now, and I think through peer learning and sharing best practices as well as any organization I know. So very relevant to today's discussion, I want to mention also that over the past 2 years, the United States has partnered with the OECD and its 37 other member countries and a lot of non-members around the world, a very diverse group, on a U.S.-funded initiative to create diverse, resilient, and secure semiconductor supply chains through a public-private exchange network and a database, and that we're using to share best practices and regulatory frameworks for building semiconductor ecosystems. The point being is that we are going to do this better when we do it together. And we believe there are many, many exciting parts of this policy that can be helpful and advantageous to people all over the world who are trusted partners and friends and who can contribute to the larger goal of having a safe, resilient, reliable supply chain in this space. And the economic opportunities are enormous. And that's true at the sub-national level and for all of you who are pursuing these place-based economic development strategies. So thank you again. Thank you to all our panelists. And we'll keep doing these sub-national webinars because we know they're so helpful in spreading the good work of the OECD to an ever wider circle of folks who can put it to work, creating real change and real progress in all the communities that all of you represent. So with that, I thank you for your time, and I'll turn it back over to Delphine.
Thank you very much, Ambassador Maloney. So I would like now to turn to Nadim Ahmad, who is the Deputy Director of the OECD Center for Entrepreneurship, SMEs, Region and Cities, to deliver a scene-setting presentation of our work on place-based industrial policy. So Nadim, the floor is yours.
Thanks, Delphine, and thanks also to you, Ambassador, not just for the fantastic, I think, introduction. I guess I could just leave it there and say, that's it, let's move on to the conversation now. I think you've said an awful lot of the motivational words that I wanted to say in my presentation, but also thank you for basically bringing us all together, because these events wouldn't be happening without the support of the delegation. So thank you enormously for that, and thank you also for the words about continuing this conversation and continuing this activity. We'd very much like to continue that. So look, I mean, I'm going to start just by giving a brief overview in terms of perhaps one of the reasons why we think this work is really important. And I guess I don't really need to be, I think, doing much by way of motivation. I think that what we've seen over the last, certainly post-COVID few years, is that there's been this reawakening of what used to be a perhaps dirty phrase, industrial policy, and it's become mainstream again. And I think that there's a realization that industrial policy, can work. And that's certainly, I think, in the context of issues like megatrends, recognizing, for example, that we may have to look again at how we manage these transitions. We're learning the lessons, I guess, of some of the transitions around the first wave or the more recent wave of globalization. And we have an opportunity, I think, to make it work better this time round. I think that's where an awful lot of the focus is. And when we talk about issues like competitiveness, which has become perhaps, the flavor of the month once again, and always has been, but perhaps even more so today, I think that connection between competitiveness and resilience, when we talk resilience in supply chains, resilience to shocks, I think has become, critical to the conversation. And we, I think certainly, because of course we have been discussing place-based policies for, many decades within the OECD. I mean, there's always been an underpinning part of that, which has been an industrial dimension. So, for us, it's bread and butter to talk about place-based industrial policies. And it's also bread and butter to think more strategically about how we can make industrial policies as they're emerging today work better. And basically ticking a number of different birds, or killing a number of different birds with the same stone. So looking at ways in which we can drive competitiveness, but also I think addressing many of the challenges that regional development policies have always, I think, tried to bring to the fore in terms of reducing, for example, some of the inequalities that also they play out in the way they can undermine resilience and they can undermine growth. And we're becoming much more aware of some of those risks now than we were before. And we see them all the time, I think, when we think about breakdowns of supply chains. We have a much better understanding of risks in the economic systems today than we did before. So that's perhaps just some framing. I'm going to run through now perhaps some additional information. I think that I think we'll be able to feed the conversation that we're going to see taking place. So move on to the next slide. Perhaps this is the best starting point. We know that we've had perhaps within the OECD, but more generally across the globe, this big slowdown in productivity growth, and that's been one of the key, I think, economic issues that we've had for decades now. But within a spatial context, we also see, for example, those disparities in productivity also growing. We see some places having even more sclerotic productivity growth than the average. And this chart looks at the difference between labour productivity in metropolitan and non-metropolitan areas. So, for example, that rural-urban paradigm is a very simple way of illustrating it. And of course, we see those gaps, which is the red dots in 2002, and we see those gaps increasing over the next 2 decades. So, in many countries, and in fact, most OECD countries have seen productivity gaps increase, and so they remain large, and even where they have shrunk, they remain large. So I think that's perhaps the primary point of departure for the conversation. Because when we think about competitiveness, of course, we can think about, how can we drive competitiveness by focusing on, for example, agglomeration economies within urban areas. But we overlook the fact that actually that creates other types of costs to the economic system that are often not priced in or often perhaps misunderstood, but the impact on broader notions of resilience. And we see that when we talk about things like geographies of discontent, for example. They have costs and they have ways of undermining the economic system. So we need to better understand how we can address those. I think the other, really important things becoming much better understood now is that there is huge potential, or untapped potential rather, from perhaps trying to fix some of what were endemic problems in some of these areas, because they're not necessarily endemic. They can be fixed with the right levels of investment. And we see, for example, inequalities in areas that can be fixed, for example, access to telecommunications or access to finance. These are areas that, if we fix those, then we can have perhaps improved outcomes in some of those areas that continue to lag, and some of those areas where there are costs associated with these geographies of discontent. I'll move on to the next slide now, but that's perhaps the most important framing. Now, when we look, for example, at some of the other, areas that we know have a major impact on competitiveness, productivity growth, income growth, employment growth, we also know, for example, that a region's connectivity is also critically important. And when we look, for example, not just, for example, whether regions trade internationally or not, but also whether regions are able to access global greenfield FDI, we also see massive disparities. We see that greenfield FDI within the OECD going to really just a handful of OECD regions. Half of the global FDI the global greenfield FDI within the OECD goes to just 34 of the regions out of 357 OECD regions. So, it's really targeted, but it means, of course, that we're not able to see those benefits of the FDI spreading out to other regions. So there's something perhaps that can be fixed there and something that needs to be looked at again. So when we have the opportunity to refocus or have a new discussion around industrial policy, there's an opportunity to think about what is it that we can do to fix some of these problems too. Next slide, please. Now, just perhaps as a step back a little bit, when we talk about industrial policies, it's not, unambiguous in terms of what the objectives are. I think that certainly, first and foremost, they are becoming clear they're mechanisms to drive competitiveness. They're mechanisms to boost growth and to create jobs. But as I'll show you in some slides that follow, many of them are increasingly also embodying this notion of also tackling regional disparities. And there are a whole range of different policy tools that are available to address, perhaps, to implement industrial policies, and a whole range of different sectors that we're observing. Many of them, of course, around these strategic industries, which is becoming, increasingly what we're seeing in the industrial policy space. Next slide, please. But one thing I wanted to say, perhaps that's really critical when we think about this place-based notion of industrial policies, and which we can't ignore, is the people, for example, and where they live, where they work, and what the potential is to leverage on untapped potential. So when we think about, for example, new industrial policies in places, there's always going to be a recognition that we need to capitalize on the comparative advantages those places have. But sometimes what they also assume is that they can become magnets of sucking people in or attracting in that talent, attracting in those jobs. But we know, of course, that actually labour mobility is not as much as, as high as we'd like our economic models to work and assume that. People generally want to have jobs where they live. So it's not just an issue in terms of well-being, it's a real issue in terms of being able to make industrial policy work. And when we look, for example, at the labour market tightness of green task jobs, for example, we see that there are significant differences across OECD regions. So again, a recognition that the decisions or about where places, where the industrial policy is going to work also needs to be based in these grounded in these realities about people, their own skills, their own capacities, and the transitions, for example, they may be able to make within those places. We're doing some really interesting work at the moment within the OECD that looking at place-based transitions that move away, for example, from the notion that you can have a national transition that looks at the total population or the total stock of skills and assume that one can move from one industry to another, that's place-based. We recognize that the transitions need to be place-based, and that's where people, have an opportunity to make that transition, but living within their local area. Next slide. So this slide here, I'm not going to talk you through it, but it's just to illustrate that when we talk about industrial policy, increasingly, and as the ambassador mentioned, for example, with the CHIPS Act, we're seeing an awful lot of that is actually embodying this notion of regional development, addressing, for example, some of these spatial inequalities. I think there's a growing realization that new industrial policy, as place-based, I think can deliver on two fronts, on the competitiveness front, but also in terms of addressing some of those disparities. And like I said, and this is certainly something that we're going to be looking at, in abundance in our forthcoming ministerial meeting on the Regional Development Policy Committee of the OECD has a ministerial meeting taking place next May in Warsaw. We're going to be looking at these issues in abundance. We want to see, for example, how we can marry industrial policy and regional development policy under this umbrella of new industrial policy, but also by recognizing that actually the costs of not acting on these place-based disparities have costs that impact on overall competitiveness. I think that's critical to understanding why it needs to be place-based. So I'm not going to go through this. The slides will be available, but you'll see that there's a huge amount of basically information and practice that's taking place on the ground in countries that's fundamentally place-based. Next slide, please. And last but not least, I think what's critical in this space is to make sure that when we talk about industrial policies and regional development policies, we need to make sure that we have good multi-level governance. And so this is a very strong focus of our activities within the OECD. We need to make sure that that sort of bottom-up approach that works in terms of regional development policies can marry with the top-down approach that's often, I think, implemented with industrial policies. And so ultimately we have this mixed approach that marries these two, I think, sets of policy instruments together. And I think that's the last slide that I have, unless I'm mistaken. Next slide, we'll see. No, it's not. So there's a couple of questions for the panel that I thought would be very useful. And I think that really, how can place-based industrial policies better address local regional development challenges in different national contexts? I think is what I'm looking forward to hearing from the panel. But I think just to frame that, we're also doing lots of other work within the OECD, which is recognizing that actually there's a connection between regional attractiveness more generally, because of course regional attractiveness as a mechanism to suck in, for example, FDI or talent or indeed visitors, is also a really important part of competitiveness. But also, of course, there's a growing recognition that the new industrial policies that are place-based are also, I think, really good tools to address not just some of the challenges associated with the green transition, the digital transition and demographic change, but also provide, I think, real opportunities to drive growth and drive better outcomes. So I leave it there. I'm really looking forward to hearing the conversation. Thank you.
Thank you, Nadim. I think together with the ambassador's remark, you've set things up perfectly for our conversation. So it's now time for me to leave you in the expert hands of Mark Morrow, who is a senior fellow and the Metropolitan Policy Director at the Brookings Institution, to moderate our panel discussion. So Mark, over to you.
Absolutely. Thanks so much, Delphine. Great to see you all. Thank you, Mr. Ambassador. Thank you, Mr. Ogland. That was excellent. And of course, thanks to the OECD for hosting us, creating yet another great learning platform for all of us as we continue to embrace this moment of change. And indeed, it is, I believe, telling that a period of unprecedented disruption, epitomized by the pandemic, contested democracy, sharpening security tensions, global climate change, and rifts around inequality, is exactly when a compelling place-based variant of industrial policy has come to the fore in multiple forms, but it's a global phenomenon. Place-based forms of industrial policy, such as the ones we're going to be talking about here, are emerging as in myriad locations and contexts because I believe they offer a more pointed, flexible, and efficient way of tackling serious macro challenges. Sometimes we forget that as Mr. Almond suggested, this is a way to test something that works. Grounded, they provide a more pointed way of tackling macro challenges. Grounded, intentional, and targeted place-based interventions are for many issues, in my view, simply a better mousetrap for getting at the micro underpinnings of these macro problems. Let's think about it. Place-based industrial policies can target specific locations and detail of a market problem. So they're a way to get leverage. They can intervene in what Gary Pisano and Willie Shih call a nation or region's industrial commons, the place-based concentration of research institutions, skilled workers, and suppliers that anchor competitive industries like the semiconductor sector. And third, place-based policies are more likely to get the civics right, especially when they enlist and catalyze local bottom-up problem solving. My colleague Joe Perilla observes, transforming a regional economy requires mobilizing a wide variety of local actors, networks, and knowledge flows. I don't think that will happen so much with universal policies, and you're more likely to do that when the region is with you and they are engaged. And I think that is a significant, often underlooked side aspect of these policies. So in a particularly tumultuous age of economic history, many OECD countries are taking a place-based approach to scale strategic sectors and bolster economic security. Likewise, nations are using place-based strategies to address the energy transition and mitigate and place-specific hardships of deindustrialization. This is a very flexible array of approaches. In the U.S., as we've begun to hear, the Inflation Reduction Act looks to invest in green tech manufacturing, while the CHIPS and Science Act aims to relocalize the U.S. semiconductor industry and build the U.S. R&D base. The EU Green Deal and the Critical Raw Materials Act seek to position the Union as a production hub. For that matter, parallel initiatives in Japan, Quebec, Germany, France, Brazil, UK, and others provide a wide variety of initiatives to look at. Hence our conversation today. Given how much is going on, often in far-flung locations involving a lot of new departures, our hosts have wisely seen the value of bringing together a group of smart implementers in several regions to describe what they are doing, how they are doing it, and why. And so what we're going to do now is hear from 4 experienced frontline executors of new and ongoing place-based interventions in 3 nations, the US, Canada, and Germany. In each case, I'm going to gently quiz the speakers, one speaker before moving into the next. We'll start with some initial thoughts from Amanda Mays, a sector advisor for policy in the CHIPS Program Office of the U.S. Department of Commerce here in Washington, D.C., where I am. After that, we'll hear from Daniel Silverman, Vice President for Foreign Direct Investment at Investiments Bank Quebec, Thomas Horn, the CEO of Saxony Trade and Invest in Germany, and Kenny McDonald, the President and CEO of One Columbus, where he's been on the front lines of local implementation of a major CHIPS Act subsidy investment in Intel's projected $20 billion semiconductor plant in Columbus. So after that, we've heard from all of them. We'll seek to reserve some time for questions from you in the audience. Feel free to drop your questions even through the discussion in the chat function, and we'll try to get some of those in as well. So to start, I'd just like to invite Amanda Mays from the U.S. CHIPS program to lay out some context on the U.S. scene, focusing on the U.S. semiconductor push, and then we'll move from there. Amanda?
Thanks, Mark. You can go to the next slide. So we just want to give some scene-setting information on how we're approaching this place-based investment at the Commerce Department for the CHIPS Program Office. So beyond making awards, as the CHIPS and Science Act outlined in its legislation, the CHIPS Program Office has really focused on creating a national vision for the semiconductor industry, and one that emphasizes the importance of regional ecosystems and industry clusters. We identified this place-based work first in our strategy for the CHIPS for America Fund, which was released shortly after the CHIPS and Science Act was signed in September of 2022. And that says that regional clusters are crucial to building a competitive industry. It is a priority that was also included in our Vision for Success, released in February of 2023, and a strategy that we've been adhering to and implementing our CHIPS funding. So we're focusing on our CHIPS regional strategy to make this a reality and lean into assisting states and regions with the tools that they need to accelerate the development and growth of these regional clusters, as well as successfully support CHIPS-funded projects and compete on a global scale. So first, what does CHIPS mean by regional clusters? Why are we focusing on them as a key strategy? We've announced proposed investments and final awards in leading edge manufacturing in 7 states across the US. These leading edge investments are going to be critical for seeding regional industry clusters and really serve as the impetus for all of the follow-on public and private investment in order for those clusters to be sustainable. So why is that? First, U.S. production of leading edge chips is one of the key strategic goals for CHIPS for America. Today, the U.S. produces 0% of the world's leading edge logic chips and less than 2% of advanced memory chips. So through the announced and proposed CHIPS investments in leading edge logic manufacturers, the U.S. will produce 20% of those leading edge logic chips by the end of the decade and 10% of advanced memory chips by 2035. We know that these chips specifically require the most sophisticated technology and processes available in the world today, which makes these fabs the most expensive and transformational for regional ecosystems, with high projected capital expenditure costs, large physical footprints, high volumes of suppliers and associated follow-on investment, and a wide diversity of workforce needs. So that complexity of these types of facilities requires significant partnership from all levels of government and across multiple agencies at each level of government to facilitate timely and effective implementation. And that could be on topics ranging from supply chain coordination to permitting to physical infrastructure, workforce development, emergency management, et cetera. So we expect that these industry clusters will have multiple commercial scale fabs, supply chain, infrastructure, utilities, workforce, childcare, R&D, and innovation, all the things that are crucial to establishing a vibrant domestic semiconductor industry. And we also expect that these clusters are going to be seeded by those leading edge investments, and that will really catalyze transformational place-based investments, supporting good jobs, renewed infrastructure, vibrant innovation pipelines, broadly shared economic growth in communities that, seeded by the semiconductor industry, the wider community, even not involved in the semiconductor industry, will benefit from these investments. So through our regional strategy, we're making sure that the federal government does its part to aid and accelerate this cluster development. Next slide. So why are we implementing this regional strategy? Namely, we're trying to use the comparative advantages of the federal government to accelerate and enable development at the state and local levels. Our goal is to make sure that CHIPS and Commerce are not just providing funding to the industry, but we're also providing support to the regions where the industry is making these investments. We're focused on providing resources to the state and local governments because they're really on the hook for supporting the project implementation with their own public resources. So all of this is all with the goal of fostering industry cluster growth on a timeline that's responsive to the needs of the private sector. So as CHIPS-funded projects are being constructed and begin operations, and as these regions continue to attract private sector companies, the industry will find that these places are ripe for investment and great places to continue to build out the U.S. semiconductor industry. So our regional strategy has three main goals. First, given our national purview across various states and regions where CHIPS is making investments, we want to share implementation solutions across these partners. So we want to be able to facilitate conversations in ways that the states and regions can share best practices and shared learning, and really collaborate with one another in advance of this national vision. Second, we want to engage with the states and regions on targeted problem solving. So whether that's engaging across jurisdictions within the regions to spur collaboration for mitigating potential challenges, working across the region in collaboration with the federal government to spur new and creative ideas to address issues. Our goal here really is where things are stuck and how we can provide a bit of a one-stop shop approach within the federal government for finding ways to mitigate these issues. We want to take the opportunity to do so for the regions. And we also want to bring in federal resources and capacity to some of the large-scale issues that local stakeholders are grappling with in their support of the industry. And then finally, we want to engage with the states on building regional capacity and support for this CHIPS national vision for success. So that will come through fostering whole of government collaboration, from commerce to the states, to the counties, to the city governments hosting these projects, bringing in shared experiences from other regions and external experts who can spur innovation and regional planning strategies, and then using our partnerships across all levels of government to identify those key issues we want to focus on together so that we can bring public sector together in furtherance of support of these projects. Next slide. So as I said earlier, we're initially focusing this work on the 7 states and regions hosting leading edge manufacturing, using those investments to catalyze the regional cluster growth. This is, as I said, consistent with that CHIPS vision for success and the priorities I outlined, and also represents where we are in terms of the CHIPS for America program implementation. So as you've seen recently, the CHIPS Program Office has been finalizing many of its preliminary awards with companies, including having so far finalized 3 of the 5 leading edge company awards with Intel, TSMC, and Micron, which was announced yesterday. And now with our program management office, as that begins to work with awardees through their disbursements and the implementation of the grant funding, we'll have the opportunity to reassess and evolve this strategy. In addition, the CHIPS R&D office has been making many large-scale investments, including for packaging, a new Manufacturing USA Institute, small business investments, and through NatCast. So as funding continues there, opportunities will likely arise to expand this framework around R&D clusters, as well as integrate that R&D funding into the manufacturing in the same geographies. Next slide. So currently we're in the process of facilitating the signing of all of government partnership documents with state and local governments that are hosting these leading edge projects. We are using this as a tool to ensure efforts are streamlined across government and can address project and ecosystem challenges in a timely and fulsome manner. It also creates a framework for us for collaboration and outlines the commitments from each level of government in the partnership to support development of those vibrant regional semiconductor ecosystems. That might be on policies that support necessary infrastructure, supply chain attraction, housing, workforce transit, or other regulatory frameworks and support structures that foster that ecosystem growth. Second, we're working to firm up our partnerships with other federal agencies for resources and technical assistance, and design collaborative programming to inform regions, and also give them the tools to make the most strategic and sustainable decisions for their regions in support of industry. So we're already engaging with over 15 federal agencies and boroughs and working with them to help coordinate and track down funding programs that might be available and of interest to state and local governments, having dedicated points of contact that we can work with when regions have questions as they continue this implementation, and devising regional and cross-regional conversations on things like infrastructure planning topics, long-term grid resiliency, or strategies so that as these CHIPS-funded projects are operating, we're not going to run into critical issues 10 to 20 years down the line. We're thinking about those things now. There's also a number of other place-based programs, as the ambassador mentioned earlier, within the government that are in the same geographies. So the tech hubs, regional innovation engines, Department of Transportation's Build America Bureau, Department of Energy programs, Department of Defense Microelectronics Commons. So we're working with those agency teams on their initiatives to align efforts and ensure we aren't creating inefficiencies or redundancies of work. And then finally, as I said, we're putting together a learning community across states and regions, so one that will facilitate collaboration on best practices, knowledges, and solution sharing on things that each of these regions is working to figure out. So things that may not be unique to any one region, but where collaboration might be helpful. Think about like curriculum and workforce solutions, childcare solutions, permitting solutions. We want to be able to give them a resource to create a community of practice and collaborative structure that advances our domestic industry strategy in a common way. That's all I've got.
Very good. Very helpful, Amanda. Thank you. So what I'd like to do now is turn to the 3 regional examples that we're featuring today. And to start this, I'd like to turn to Daniel Silverman of Investissement Quebec to describe their place-based investment stance.
Great. Thank you very much, Mark, and thank you very much, Amanda. I think it leads right into kind of where I want to go with this. Good morning, evening, afternoon. Dan Silverman, I'm the Vice President of Foreign Direct Investment with Investissement Quebec. We're a bit of a different economic development organization from your traditional EDO. We're the state economic development, primary economic development agency and financing corporation. And what that means is that we manage most, if not all, of the different funding and support programs at the government level with the Ministry of Economy, Innovation, and Energy. But we also have our own $15 billion private equity portfolio, which allows us to not just invest in businesses, but in specific projects. And part of that regulation around that is that there could be a foreign entity that is looking to expand its operations to Quebec, and we will look at a potential investment in equity in the Quebec project. So this makes it a little bit more of a risk sharing and opportunity for Quebec. And then on top of it, we also have our economic development financial assistance programs, which is somewhat like I like to say very generally like a bank, where we could do loans with interest, no interest, little interest, partially forgivable, fully forgivable. And so when we look at economic development attraction, exporting, we also have a mandate for outbound investment. So we will help Quebec companies look at potentially expanding to the United States or to Europe or to Asia. And we can also financially support the debt that they'll go into in making this project. And then the other piece of it, which I'll come full circle on, is our innovation and technological support. We have a team of about 120 engineers that help companies automate, roboticize, use AI to increase their productivity in certain areas: digital transformation, environmental performance, innovation. So somewhat different from our partners within Quebec and across Canada, but it provides an excellent opportunity for us to do a little bit more for companies than what we've done in the past. I would say, just as an example, similar organizations would be Singapore Economic Development Board, and then you have BPI France and Business France, which are 2 separate entities where with IQ it's merged together. In terms of our industrial plan, well, Quebec is a great strategic location between Canada, the US, and Europe. We're a leader in R&D in Canada. We have a very, I would say, aggressive R&D tax credit that is stackable with the provincial and the federal government. We have 18 colleges and universities in our market, and we're supported at the moment by 90% of our energy development is 99% green renewable hydroelectricity, which makes us a very attractive option for companies looking to expand here. It used to be in abundance. Things have changed, but I'll get into that in a little bit more down in the next few slides. We're not the largest market. I think 9 million people in 2024 in Quebec. However, we're a very strategic partner to the rest of Canada, Europe, and the United States. GDP of about 575 billion, about 300 billion of goods and services exported to Canada internationally in 22. We did 13 billion of foreign investment, much of which came into the strategic sectors and the battery and the ambassador mentioned the Inflation Reduction Act, and that was something that had a significant impact on us and a significant opportunity for us to support the U.S. economy in battery manufacturing, and also in the CHIPS Act. And I'll get into that in the next 2 or 3 slides. And given where our commercial gateway is, and in the next slide I talk about the partnerships we have with the U.S., Europe, and Asia, is we have an extensive network of free trade agreements. And that's why a lot of people look at Quebec of how we can take advantage of that to do business in more than 40 different countries. And the Canadian Free Trade Agreement really helps us when we're looking at that growth. So we've partnered with the U.S. Commercial Service and the state of New York and Vermont and others into how we could support the growth and development of the semiconductor industry. But also looking at how US-based businesses could take advantage of our free trade agreements in Europe and Asia as well. So we consider ourselves to be a very strategic location, but also a very strategic partner in the growth of the North American economy. And that's where I'll spend a little bit more time here is on the innovation zones that we've created over the last 2 years. 4 innovation zones have been announced. 3 more are to be announced in the next few, I'd say 6 to 9 months. The first one started with our Technum, which is our semiconductor, and I'll get into that detail in the next slide, followed by our quantum computing innovation zone, our energy transition innovation zone. And the reason that one is there is because the majority of the battery manufacturing projects went into the same region. So we created it there, and then the aerospace innovation zone. But what this all comes down to really, and the connection between all of them, is the semiconductors and the microchips. They all play into that more than the others playing into it. When you look at our aerospace innovation zone, the amount of microchips that's needed for airplanes, for eVTOL, energy transition, when you're looking at the battery and quantum computing, it all kind of has a spiderweb effect going back to the microelectronics. And we've created somewhat organically this melting pot of collaboration between businesses, innovative infrastructure, knowledge base, and the scientific community. And it really all started in a place called Bromont, which is just north of the United States and a little bit east of Montreal. But the organization is called C2MI, and it's to accelerate the development and commercialization of components essential to digital and quantum technologies. It's encompassed of about 4 different labs at the moment: MEMS, semiconductor assembly and testing, analytical services, and printing, electronics, and card assembly. So it's very specific to what we're doing, and very much, as mentioned earlier, in line with supporting the Albany-Bromont corridor, but going into the Midwest and into the Southwest. So the Midwest, obviously being our colleague Kenny on the line, and down into the Phoenix area as well, Texas and Phoenix. So when you look at the ecosystem that's been created around Technum, it's major corporations such as IBM, which made another recent investment into the market, ABB, Telesign, DALSA. And these companies are not just there, they're present, they're part of the board of directors of this innovation zone. They work in collaboration with the University of Sherbrooke, McGill University, which is a top-ranked university across the globe, University of Montreal, Polytechnic. So we've created not just a provincial, but also a federal melting pot, because we have the National Research Centre of Canada that's located there to really help develop a set of skills for employees, R&D, IP, and technological development that is going to support both Europe, the United States, and Canada. It's really become kind of an integrative innovation chain that's been created in this. And when I mentioned earlier that it focuses on some of the other innovation zones, when you look at our aerospace innovation zone, one of the top 5 aerospace markets in the globe, all this comes into play as we continue to grow this innovation zone. And like I mentioned, it's really central around the microelectronics, because you can't do it without microchips. You can't have a vehicle energy transition, you can't have a battery sector, you can't have a quantum computing sector, you can't have an aerospace, and then our future zones, which will be life sciences and others, all centralizes around what we're doing in Bromont to create this. So without this, we don't have our Aerospace Innovation Zone, which is made up of Bombardier, Boeing, Airbus, Bell Helicopter, Beta Technologies, Jaunt, and Wisk, which are all in the eVTOL space, and all of the leadership that comes in from the CREAC. We've had a significant presence in Quebec for a long time, but if we're not supporting the US and the European ecosystems as it comes to microelectronics or semiconductors, we're not going to be able to be successful within our own innovation zone. So in terms of the subject today of industrial policy, these innovation zones have now become key to the future of Quebec. And growing these innovation zones to support our partners within Canada and within the United States and Europe and abroad. But what it's allowing us to do is to be more targeted and more specific. I mentioned before we used to have an abundance of green renewable energy. It's no longer the case. We still have it, but we need to be much more strategic in how we use it. You can kind of maybe see over my right shoulder, different climate from where some of you might be right now, snow and rain. So we have quite a strong need for high intensity energy throughout the course of the year. We have the high heat and then we have the low cold. So we're trying to be more creative. Hydro-Quebec is going to put out about $150 billion of RFPs to go and do solar, to go and do wind power and more hydro, but it takes microchips. It takes all of this of what we've done in these innovation zones. So the creation of these innovation zones allows us to be more targeted, allows us to look at more opportunities to collaborate with businesses within Quebec, within Canada, and from abroad. And the ability of Investissement Québec and the Ministry of Economy, Innovation, and Energy to be reactive in terms of the type of funding we can put to it and potentially the venture capital that we can put into it makes it a very interesting play for companies looking at doing R&D. We are not going after Micron or Intel or Samsung to build a microchip facility. We want to support those based out of Quebec, and those are going to land in the United States. One might land elsewhere in Canada, but I think what our mandate here is to be a good partner to our geographical partners across the globe. So I wanted to keep it short and sweet to leave time for questions afterwards. And my colleagues, thank you all very much for your time and look forward to answering your questions.
Yep. Thank you. Yeah, you have a lot to talk about. And so we will try and keep these conversations as tight as we can. I've just one question for you, though. Can you just go over some of the specific spatial links within, say, the aerospace zone, right? I mean, they seem, at what scale are we talking about as far as the specific geographical interactions?
Yeah, I mean, I'd say we're top 3 in North America with Wichita and Seattle in terms of 1 and 2 respectively, or 2 and 1 respectively. But in terms of we have the OEMs that manufacture the planes, the A220s that are with Airbus. We have the helicopters, a certain division of helicopters being done at Bell. We're now looking into the battery for the eVTOL. But we're selling these planes and helicopters and whatnot are being sold across the globe. But the R&D to go into it, Bell Helicopter is based in Texas. We work very closely with the Texas operation to help support their growth here in Quebec. But the whole chain is really international. We have a lot of French investment, European investment, German investment, US investment. And we have our export team, which is present in 37 of our delegations across the globe, looking at developing these partnerships for R&D and IP.
But bounded in these discrete Canadian geographies.
Yeah, it's basically the greater Montreal area, I would call it.
Very exciting. Very good introduction. So now I'd like to ask Thomas Horn describe the activities of Saxony Trade and Invest. Thomas, you're up. See if you can fast break, keep it concise, and really looking forward to this.
Thank you, Mark. Good evening from the wonderful city of Dresden, here in the Free State of Saxony, which is a federal state in the east of Germany. And here is the heartbeat of the European semiconductor industry. And so I want to start with a short overview about the semiconductor industry in Europe. With the next slide, please. At the moment in Europe, there are around 40 fab locations in several countries in Europe. You see it here on the map. And this is important to know that there is a center with the most factories, which is here in our region, but there are several European countries where the semiconductor industry is at home. And speaking about place-based industry policies, it is important to know that each region, each state has its own policy for that, with different reasons, with a different history in the industry. And we, as the main hub, we tried since several of years to bring it together and to make a bottom-up policy from the regional level to the European level. And that's why we started last year. We started it earlier, but last year we've been successful initiative to bring up together the European regions of the semiconductor production within the Semiconductor Regions Alliance, and to play a significant role on the policy making on the European level. And we all are somehow we are competitors, but we believe very strong in cooperation, because the semiconductor industry, Manda mentioned it, is a very expensive industry. And you have to join your efforts in research, in development, to bring up the new innovations to the new products for the clients and the topics of the future. So this cooperation is very necessary and very useful also for the future cooperation in the industry. And on behalf of that, we pushed the European Commission since many years, so that last year also the European Chips Act was published in September 23, and the goal is that Europe will gain again more market shares on the global level, doubling its impact from 10% at the moment to 20% to 2030. And this is also connected with money, as it is in the US Chips Act, to play a future role on the global market in the semiconductor industry. And at the moment, when the new term of the new European Commission started a couple of weeks ago, now already started a discussion about the European Chips Act 2.0, to bring it forward again and to push it also for the next years. In Germany, which is on the next slide, we have around 20 fabs, and you see in the green circle, this is our region in Saxony, which is the largest cluster, not only in Germany, but in Europe. And it's in the production, it's a bit different from the US production, and also a bit different from the Korean or Taiwanese or Japanese production. So the European semiconductors are mostly focused on products, on industry products, on cars, on microcontrollers, on Industry 4.0, aerospace, railway, and all those industries. And this is a bit special, and also the research in Germany and in Europe is focused on these industries. And so the chips are a bit different from those from the computers or from the smartphones. And this is but this needs also the interaction with the other industries which are dominating here in the region. And so also the CHIPS Act brought us some very new big investments in the semiconductor industries. Alone in our region at the moment, there are almost 20 billion of euro investments taking place. In the construction is going on, and it's very fast. Within 2-3 years, the new fabs will be done. And on the next slide, we see that this is not an effect you can get within some weeks, months, or even within some years. So our experience here in the region is that semiconductor industry and the semiconductor network, a semiconductor supply chain, really needs much time. It's a marathon. So we started here around 60 years ago. This is our journey we've done. So even before the German reunification, in the early 70s, 60s, it started here in the university with the first semiconductor processes, and in before the Germany united in 1986, it was a relevant milestone. The first megabit memory chip was produced in the former German Democratic Republic, and this brought us also the basis after the reunification that the next big steps of investments came into, done by Siemens and AMD in this time. And in this time, we called it the lighthouse policy. So it was always the policy of the government to bring in the big OEMs as a lighthouse, and around them then to create also the networks, the supply chains, to invest a lot in research, to invest a lot in the universities for education of the people, and always in a thinking to connect it to the other industries. And so around the lighthouses, a lot of smaller lights also could be established. And so this brought us forward up to now. And the big investment decisions of last year by Infineon were 5 billion euro, and TSMC, which is now constructing here their first European fab in Dresden for 10 billion euro, is a result of this long-term policy, and also a result of the European Chips Act, because we always hear from all the companies, it's not the money alone. So the money is important because there's a competition also on the funding worldwide. It's also done in Asia as well. But you need the ecosystem. You will not go to a place where you cannot find partners for the production, where you cannot find the suppliers for the materials, where you cannot find the equipment producers, the maintenance, and and that was mentioned already, where you cannot find the people which are able to do it. And you need the knowledge in the region, you need the people in the region, and you need also partners for developing the new products. And today, on the next slide, as mentioned, we have around more than 3,000 companies here in the region with 76,000 employees. Our forecast at the moment is that this number will grow until 2030. So within the next 5 years, we will have around 25,000 jobs more in this industry due to this big investments which are taking place at the moment. And when we now say that every third chip in Europe comes from Dresden and from Saxony, so this number will grow as well. And again, it's an interaction with the other industry, especially here in Germany with the automotive industry. You have to know that in each car you will find around 1,000 different chips. Compare it to a cell phone. In a cell phone, you find some dozen, 2-3 dozen of chips. So this is a significant number. So every sensor, every function in the car, maybe in the engine or in the entertainment or anywhere, they all need chips. And this is very pushing it forward in the industry, in the mechanical construction, in the robotics, in all those AI topics, of course, as well. So this is always the push for the semiconductor industry. And they tell us that if they would not interact with their clients in a close distance and in the same research institutes and regions, they cannot do it. And this is a part of the secret. And again, also in the European cooperation with the other European regions. I mentioned the names, AMD today, GlobalFoundries as an American company, and TSMC as a Taiwanese company. Also, this cooperation works well. The TSMC investment here is a joint venture investment. This is worth to mention. It's 70% TSMC, it's 10% NXP from Netherlands, and 10% Bosch from Germany, and 10% Infineon from Germany. So 4 big companies joined forces to establish a new fab together, which is also a very good message, I guess. And this shows that the cooperation topic is very significant for this region and for this industry as well. And this is also a part of industrial policy to understand this and to support the companies in this way they behave. So that is the experience we have here, and which is successful since 60 years, and we are quite optimistic that also for the next decades to come, it will stay this way. Thank you so far.
Yeah, very impressive. we're short on time, but I'm going to ask you one quick note. How can you say briefly the ways Saxony's efforts are nested within those of the nation and maybe even the EU geography? Amanda spoke a little bit about how U.S. activities are trying to intersect with other layers. Can you give us just a brief moment on that, and then we'll need to move on?
So of course you have the overall European industry policy, like the European Chips Act, but the Chips Act itself is a framework which is relevant for the member states of the European Union. And so the federal government of Germany is the partner for the European Commission, and we as the federal state in Germany are the partner for the federal government in Berlin. But in this semiconductor topic, we are so close together. And we, as a region, also we have effect directly to the European Commission with our own office in Brussels, and the ESRA, which I mentioned in the beginning, the European Semiconductor Regions Alliance, is a key answer for making policy also on the international and European level for the European regions.
Very good. The important considerations that are transferable to other nations as well. Let's turn now to Kenny McDonald of One Columbus in Ohio, an energetic regional development organization playing an important role in supporting the major semiconductor investment in that state. Kenny, you want to give us 6-7 minutes here?
I'll be shorter than that, Mark. We've got plenty of detail. So I'll make it very simple. Thank you to the ambassador and the organization for making this time available. I'll just give you a quick preview of the Columbus region. It's in the heart of Ohio. Ohio is the 7th largest state in the U.S. And nearly 12 million people live in Ohio, making it one of the top 25 economies in the world if it was separated out as a state. Columbus is the state capital. It is the home of the Ohio State University, a Tier 1 research university with over 69,000 students as part of its as part of the city and surrounding campuses. Columbus itself is the 14th largest city. Region's about 2.5 million people, making it a mid-sized U.S. region, and our workforce continues to grow. Next slide, please. Let's give you a little preview of our organization. We represent the metropolitan area of Columbus, all of Central Ohio, and then we're partnered with organizations across the state of Ohio through what's called the Jobs Ohio Network. Jobs Ohio is our state partner, very well-funded organization that we work with daily to aid our existing companies in their growth strategies, to attract companies from across the world, to foster entrepreneurship in high growth industries, and then prepare our communities for the future. And our organization has been named one of the 10 best economic development groups in the United States for 7 straight years. We've had the luxury of Columbus as a city becoming one of the fastest growing cities in America. I believe twice in the last few years, it's been the fastest growing city in America, outpacing places like Nashville and Austin and others that you may hear about. Next slide, please. We've been very fortunate to work with Amanda and her CHIPS team really since before it was formed. And so as one of the organizations sort of got the first call when Intel was looking for a new site, we began working with them very, very intensely and privately for about 7 months, starting in 2021 and culminating in an announcement in early 2022 with President Biden and the CHIPS team and people from all over the United States coming to celebrate that. This was the first advanced fab in the Midwest. And so it sort of cracked the bottle, is what we say, for the Midwest. And now Micron's announcement in New York and others in Indiana and Michigan and surrounding Midwestern states are sort of leveraging that and building upon that. How it's going today, Just a quick update because it can be a little confusing in the news. Intel's been an unbelievable partner. They've invested over $5 billion here in Ohio so far in their construction site. The state of Ohio, the city of New Albany, where this is located, just outside of the city of Columbus, has invested, probably well over $1 billion in public money on roads and infrastructure surrounding the 1,800-acre site or 180-hectare site that we assembled for them. And that's a picture of one of the largest cranes in the entire world that is on the site. There are dozens and dozens of cranes, and you can take the slide down. I'll just maybe give a little bit more color about some of the other ways that we're actually working on industrial policy. So feel free to take the slides down. Immediately surrounding the Intel site are probably over $65 billion of hyperscale data centers, which are increasingly AI-driven data centers. I know Daniel mentioned the energy transition. We would maybe call it an energy revolution that's happening. The energy consumption demanded by the new AI economy was something unforeseen at the time that the CHIPS Act was passed. But we see every day as we locate, we have over 8 AWS campuses, 3 Google campuses, Meta's largest AI centers located in New Albany as well. Now 3 Microsoft campuses and about 8 other hyperscale data centers that are all dependent on these advanced AI chips and the energy to power them. We're also the North American home to Honda, their engineering headquarters, which will be an all-electric vehicle manufacturing facility, and the Honda LG battery partnership with just 40 minutes from Columbus as well. So when you come into Columbus as a location in North America, you can actually see the Inflation Reduction Act at work. You can see the CHIPS Act at work. You can see the energy revolution taking place and the urgency at which we're trying to solve all of these problems at once. I'd be remiss if I didn't thank Amanda personally. The CHIPS team has been the best of American service. Dedicated, smart people who gave their time and service to the country, not only to help the United States, but I think help stabilize the advanced chip industry across the world by putting this in safer and safer locations like North America, Europe, and other locations where sort of kickstarted a worldwide trend. So I want to thank them for their service and their ongoing dedication to our region.
That's great, Kenny. Appreciate those remarks. I'm going to ask you one more question. I'm interested in the dimension to which national industrial strategies and place-based industrial strategies certainly, at minimum, deeply implicate the regions that they occur in. They are, after all, place-based. So I'm curious the way you're thinking about the many new responsibilities that, your region is onloading, along with simply being deeply involved in the actual plan itself. So I wonder if you could talk a little bit about the other types of investment that matter: workforce, infrastructure, education. I've heard you talk about all of those as central, critical. Interested to hear how you think about those.
Thomas could not be more accurate when he says that companies make location decisions to be profitable. And to be profitable, you have to not only be able to build and have subsidies to support the overall business plan, but you have to execute and you have to sustain your operations over a long time. So the workforce partnerships, the alignment of major sectors. Right now, as an example, we have a bit of a mismatch between our industrial policy and our energy policy. The energy consumption with the AI revolution has started over the last 36 months is changed the game, and it requires more baseload energy, at least in the United States, than ever before. And those have to come from different types of facilities. Can't always come from renewable sources. And so we're aligning those. We're helping to be that feedback loop on the front line, saying this is working and not working. Mark, you're a great ally in that, of course. And then I'll just say one other thing. The United States is nothing but place-based policies, but it's always implemented at a state and local level across the 50 states. And so we're implementing these things and building ecosystems and cluster-based strategies constantly. This is the CHIPS Act, the IRA Act, and even the infrastructure bill in some case was the first time that we had a federal policy in many, many years that sort of came on top of that and accelerated all of that to the degree that it has. And we're very thankful for that, but it's something that we do every day.
Very good. So we actually, as promised, have a little time for some conversation, some questions. Feel free to drop more of those into the chat. I want to pick up one of them right away just to sort of round out Amanda's backdrop on the CHIPS Act in the United States, which gets to a broad issue that I've been talking about and have a new paper coming out on, which is the sustainability of these projects, which ultimately will have to be sustained in every nation over time, regardless of a shift of political administration. So one attendee to the webinar raises the question of the scenarios that Amanda may see under a new administration in the United States for the next phases of the semiconductor industrial strategy in the United States. Amanda, you want to just make a few comments here?
Yeah, I'll say we're really confident in sort of the implementation of these projects going forward because the CHIPS Act was such a widely bipartisan bill, and it's a program that's being implemented in a wide variety of states across the country, right? You saw that map that I had for the leading edge. It's in states like Idaho, Arizona, Texas, New York, Ohio, Indiana, Oregon, so wide variety there. We're also making awards for current generation and mature node companies, supply chain companies, material and equipment manufacturing companies. Those are located in places like Georgia, North Carolina, Pennsylvania, Michigan, Colorado. So again, there's a huge diversity of places across the country that are benefiting from this program. Will continue to benefit as follow-on supply chain and workforce, all of this stuff starts to sort of pick up and amplify once these leading edge companies are starting to be in operation. So, we're executing documentation as we're completing our due diligence work with companies, right? We've got a two-phased approach here at CHIPS. We've made these preliminary agreements and then for a number of months have gone through due diligence with these companies. And we plan to continue working with those states and regions where that, again, as Kenny and Thomas both said, like the private sector is making these choices of where the investments are going. So it is our job to continue to support the private sector and make sure that this initiative of the economic and national security goals that the CHIPS and Science Act was formed based on are executed, and that we're making, as Kenny just said, both the country and also the industry as a whole safer from geopolitical risk.
So you're saying even at the national level, there is policy sustainability seems potentially here available.
I think so. I think, the one thing that we benefited from with, the infrastructure, the IRA and CHIPS, sort of the ability to stack investments in places. So a lot of those programs, right, still have out years for that funding to be administered. So we'll, continue to try to maximize the opportunities for these regions to take advantage of additional funding from the government that still exists. And we'll wait to see sort of what happens with Congress and any new funding that might, be able to supplement the CHIPS Act in ways that place-based strategy benefits from.
Sure. Very, very helpful. I wanted to bring up somewhat relatedly the point that place-based strategies require a lot of skill, a lot of capacity for those implementing them, not only at the nation level, but especially maybe at the state and local level, the province level, the local level. I'm wondering if any of our regional implementers want to talk about how they have tried to build, topic-specific capacity in their regions, in their organizations, to successfully execute this. Any thoughts, Thomas or Daniel or Kenny?
Go ahead, Kenny.
I'll start. Yeah, we have both with Jobs Ohio, our state partner, and our organization have dedicated people essentially to the critical projects, because the implementation of those projects, first of all, they're just large things that are going on, and then it's caused us to be more active in Washington than ever before, and to align with policy partners. The best thing about the size and scale of some of the things that we've undertaken is that it's proven that you can't do it alone. And so I'll give you an example in the workforce system, just the Intel project alone, it sort of caused our workforce partners to form new partnerships. We have over 20 community colleges, 2-year colleges, and tech schools that have aligned with each other. Dozens of universities have formed partnerships across the United States and North America to support this. Ohio State has taken place in that, and it's built all kinds of things that we would have never taken place if not for not only the project but the Chips for America initiative.
In that sense, the mobilization around this has built execution capacity, it sounds like, in your region.
Yes,
Daniel or Thomas, any thoughts here? You were nodding at one point, Thomas.
I totally agree on that. Even as an economic development company of State One, you need a deep understanding of the industry, and you need a team of people who know which are the needs of the industry, how the processes are going on there, how is the timeline, how is the financing of all that. And on this, you can build and execute the industrial policy. But I also want to make the remark that we all live in a market economy. So industrial policy is a kind of a plan, but we live in a market economy. So you always have to see the influence of the market development and the external factors, which we have been focused in the last years, especially with the pandemic and with the international crisis we have in Ukraine and in the Middle East or something like that. And you always have to be flexible enough in your policy to react on that, and maybe even to change it a little bit if the things around you are changing. And this is a flexibility you also need with your policy, and to bring it to the policy makers as well. And this is, again, an interaction between the industry and the policy on both sides of the same medal.
Kind of two-way interaction. I'm going to maybe move to a next question and ask Daniel. How have you? I detected a sophistication in your thinking about an industrial strategy in Quebec. What are the learnings you have harvested from past industrial strategy? Whether your readings, experiences around the world, or takeaways from the really quite long history of industrial strategy that you've brought to bear in your region?
Yeah, great question. I think we've had learnings from within Quebec, whether it be the gaming industry or the aerospace
Locally
industry.
specific ones, yeah. Right.
But we've also learned from the others around us, right? How are they doing and how are they keeping it? It's one thing to make an announcement that you're going to have an industrial strategy in the sector. There's another thing to get it going and maintain it. And I think part of what we've seen in the past is that it gets created so quickly and it becomes such a hot buzz that the aftercare of it isn't in place. And it's more about the how can we get, it's nice, politicians love to make an announcement, but how do we make sure that the implementation of the project is happening like Kenny's doing with Intel? So it's one thing to attract them. The next thing is to make sure that they're able to stay and be secured. And part of the way we thought about it is, well, there's the site, but then there's everything around the site. So how do we put the knowledge base there, which is the talent? And when we talk about the Semiconductor Innovation Zone, okay, well, University of Sherbrooke is down the street. One of the biggest influencers in quantum technologies is there. There's 250 scientists in the region. So how do we put the small pieces together? It's not just about the one big user. It's putting the complementary pieces together. And I think that's where we've kind of focused on, is saying, okay, how do we put the complementary pieces together? But how are those complementary pieces, I'm saying complementary 30 times, complementary to the other industrial policies that we're doing? If it's just one specific, it's not going to succeed. But if it's multiple that attach to one another, then you'll be successful.
Sounds like, in a way, what you're saying resonates with what Thomas said a minute ago about avoiding a kind of myopia about the policy when there might be other adjacent policies, other topics,
Absolutely.
other dynamics that need to be taken up. I wonder, Thomas, Kenny, do either of you have thoughts about, maybe for all of you, this is the kind of fess up moment. What hasn't worked well and what has worked well, would you say? You can take the what has worked well first, but do touch on briefly, what you think are works in progress for you or challenges. Thomas?
I mean, sometimes we have the challenge that people believe that things go faster than they go in reality. So just if I might mention, for instance, Intel, the announcement they made for Germany in Magdeburg was almost 2 years ago, but then the market has changed, and so they have to somehow to handle it and to take a decision at the moment to postpone it a little bit, and so things are changing permanently, and to bring this message to the people. So each announcement brings an expectation to the people, and to other companies in the competition or which could profit from the investment. And you always have to handle this, that things might change, and some go faster, some go slower. And this is one point. And the second point, if we do new policies, new industry policies, we also always have to take care about bureaucracy, not to bring with a new industry new bureaucratic hurdles. That is very, very important. So of course we speak about public money, and public money need public rules to handle it. But we have to keep it somehow simple as possible. And this is a challenge, I believe, everywhere in the world. And so this is also a lesson we always take with us.
Very good.
I couldn't agree with Thomas more. I will say it does take real risk taking. And so just in our case, Intel took the decision prior to the passage of the CHIPS Act, broke ground and started construction prior to the CHIPS Act, began to spend hundreds of millions of dollars. We were fortunate enough to have bipartisan support after a lot of work to get the CHIPS Act passed, and then for them to very recently receive some of the funding to help execute the project. But it took 2 years to do that. I think constantly reminding people about what is the root reason you're doing it, which is come back. In our case, it's for national security. It is to reestablish this not just out of national pride, but out of national necessity. And Ohio, and in this case, Columbus, happened to be one of the locations that's occurring. That's critical to remind people who are looking at stock prices and daily news in some of the industries that we would be targeting, which inherently, if they're technology-based, are going to be very volatile and they're going to go up and down. And we have to take a long-term view, have to be very consistent, and you're going to have champions that are in it for the long term. And that's local and at a state level, province level, and certainly at a national level, so that it isn't you don't have wide swings in through the changes of administration. I agree with Amanda that the overall impetus for the CHIPS Act and the IRA Act, at least portions of it, were very well intended and have some real consistency between the Biden administration, Trump administration, maybe more than people understand.
That tees up what I'd like to ask a final question for maybe each of you about sustainability. Again, what happens after the award moment? You each are talking about a long game, something that's not just a matter of 5 years or 10 years, but really is likely a 20-year or longer push for actual transformation, which is, it seems like, what you're all after. Can you each give me a sense, give the group a sense of how you're thinking about sustaining your initiatives, both through organizational transformation and enhancement of your capacities, but also the brute financial aspect of this, since all of these efforts require, I think, state and regional and bottom up investment as well. Yeah, Daniel, do you want to go first?
Sure. Great question. I think it's a hard one to answer strategically, but you mentioned the financial aspect of it, and I think at the government of Quebec level and Investissement Quebec, the fact that we're investing not only with public funds but the private equity looks to ensure that we continue to get the right investment to maintain the success of these industrial policies. They'll change over time, but I'd rather see a change and adaptation than a scrapping and starting from zero again. So I think contributing financially and contributing with resources will make it sustainable. But it takes not just, and I think it's the same in the States, it's not just state level funding, it's also federal level funding and buy-in from local politicians, which in Quebec could change every 4 years.
Maintaining that commitment that Kenny talked about. Thomas, do you have a minute on this?
First of all, there is no future development without chips. That's for clear. So, and concerning sustainability, concerning the environmental impacts, or the industry is changing very rapidly. So they are going on a zero waste policy. The energy consumption is getting lower. The energy consumption of the chips will be lower, and so this is on the right path. And the third one, the financial topic. So there will be a payback also on the macroeconomic level. That is what we see very clearly in the tax revenues for the state, in the income for the people, and so this is given. And the semiconductor industry is a very good example, in my view, for sustainable development in industry.
Right, financial sustainability as it succeeds. That's an interesting way of thinking about it. Kenny, 1 minute on this, and then I'm going to round out the meeting.
I'll challenge this a little bit, Mark. I think the investments that have been made around the world, you mentioned, a number of them beyond the United States, of course. Honestly, they've been very modest. And I think regarding the scale of the transformation that's underway in the economy and technology, in our case in the U.S., we're talking about less than $100 billion that was invested in this. That's in terms of our economy, a very small amount for something so critical. And so there's enormous scrutiny on it, as there should be. There is a lot of attention paid to it. But when I look at other ways we spend money and other things we do to support economic development, including in areas like workforce and things like that, these are modest investments. They're rational investments. And I hope that we would, as professionals, fight to continue them. They support our important work on the ground across the world. And by the way, they're changing people's lives and futures by doing it. And so I would hope that we would continue the fight for those dollars and to investment in the economic development industry as a global strategy.
Great.
I just want to,
Yeah,
sorry,
please.
quickly pick up where on that last point that Kenny made of like, I think it's on, the regions and us to make sure that we're celebrating those incremental milestones and making the effects tangible for people in those communities, right? Like, great, Intel's making a $20 billion investment in my community, but like, what does that mean for me, right? You don't have to get a job at Intel to benefit from that, and making sure that we're talking about those spillover effects and how this is going to uplift an entire community is a way to sort of, create better momentum and better buy-in for these major investments as well.
Place-based policy plus place-based celebration. Well, thank you. With that, I'm afraid our time has drawn to a close. I want to thank all the speakers, wideband discussion, all of you in attendance, and of course the OECD for convening us, building this national and local capacity to design, implement, and sustain models of place-based industrial strategy is great work, hard work, but having these dialogues for peer exchange and information exchange are critical to that. So thank you all and greatly appreciate it. Thank you for all the engaging discussion. Have a great afternoon or evening. Thanks so much.